Hi.
Hello.
And we're back again.
Yes, we are. I'm so excited.
I know. So I'm Sarah.
And I'm Sarah.
Yes, and today we're talking about aliens.
Yay!
Aliens.
Yep.
If you've been living under a rock, quite frankly, the last couple of years, or maybe you haven't heard, aliens are a thing, and they're not just a fictitious thing anymore.
No, it's everywhere. Not just in social media, not just online, but in our government.
Yes. and they've actually released, the report saying that this might be true.
Yeah.
It's like the X-Files, right?
I know. I'm like, oh man, what's coming out next? Like, who knows? Like, really, who knows?
And it makes me think about the X-Files, right? Mm-hmm. And all these government programs that maybe we never knew about.
Exactly, and that's the scary part, is because right now the Congress is doing the interviews with the Navy pilots and getting down to the heart of it.
Yes.
And the Congress is having to tell these departments, the House is telling them, we're your bosses. You have to tell us this information.
Yeah.
And they said, not while video cameras are rolling.
Yeah, so now it's going to a private
so imagine
interview.
Exactly. Imagine what they're telling behind closed doors. I don't think I would want to know right now. Like, I think there would be a mass panic.
I do. I kind of want to know. So this is Leroy. He makes a little appearance every once in a while. So anyway, we're gonna just keep his tail down there. So, but we thought what we would do is we'd start out with the story first. The sort of the largest media story about alien abduction, and it happened in the early 1960s. And before that, there were some stories about alien abductions, mostly just kind of, hidden away behind closed doors. You didn't see them really much in newspapers, too much, locally a little bit. But this one actually blew up, right, on the national scene. And of course, we are talking about Betty and Barney Hill, or Barney and Betty Hill, which
the Hill investigation.
The Hill investigation, and this couple, they were just doing a late night drive.
Yeah.
Right?
And then they saw something in the sky,
right? And the thing is late night drives, I always think of like the women in white, right?
Yes.
Especially on those back roads, which is where they were, the hitchhikers. Mm-hmm. I don't actually think about aliens and late night drives.
I do. I think of them, especially when you're driving from Nevada to Idaho.
On those really long stretches.
And I'm thinking skinwalkers and aliens.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yes.
In Nevada, I'm like, every single time, I'm like, okay, just don't get abducted. And if you hear something weird, don't answer.
Don't answer. Exactly. If you saw it, you didn't see it. Exactly. So this was a couple. They actually didn't want any media coverage of their abduction. And so let's just go through the story a little bit. So we've taken notes here. So it's Betty and Barney, and I thought it was interesting that not only are they a mixed race couple, which was actually very unusual during that time, but she was older than him.
I didn't know she was older than him.
Yeah, she was a little older than him, just a little slightly bit, not a lot. It was a second marriage for both of them.
Oh, nice.
They didn't have children, but he had 2 children from his prior marriage. Mm-hmm. And they were just normal people.
Yeah.
They were very community minded, though. Apparently they served on a lot of civic boards and that type of thing, which a lot of people do in their communities. Mm-hmm. And they had, good jobs.
Yep.
But they were just normal, average people.
Yeah, just go for a drive with their dog because they left the dog out.
That's right. They had the dog and they decided to do this impromptu vacation, right? Mm-hmm. And they're driving back, and they're like all of us, right? At the end of a vacation, sometimes we're like, we're not going to stop. We're just going to plow through. We'll get home at 2 or 3 in the morning. It's okay. Mm-hmm. But it was not okay. It was not okay. So they were actually, it's called, the Hill Abduction, which is what you said earlier. It happened from September 19th to 20th, because it was over a midnight hour in 1961. And it was, let's see here. They lived in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened is they went on to vacation in Niagara Falls.
Yep.
And then they were driving home. And then what happened is they were on US Route 3. So they're going through this. It looked like this story's out there. So there's a lot of video reenactments and that type of thing. But it was a pretty desolate road going through the mountains. And apparently, I think it was Betty, saw a bright light.
Yeah.
Which is always a little scary, because of poltergeist, right? You're like,
yeah, and especially like nowadays, we have satellites that are shot up in the sky, so we expect to see something. But back then, unless it was an airplane and you're around an airport, more than likely you weren't seeing anything.
That's true. That is true. I mean, there were a few satellites, but nothing like we have now. Yeah. And there's always something a little disturbing about seeing something that's in this night that shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be there. Yeah, in fact, I'll tell you a little story as a side story from this, because this was not an alien thing. We have a friend who is an independent filmmaker, and we'll give him a plug, right? So he filmed First Date, which is on Hulu.
Yep.
And they filmed a lot of it in my house. And one night, it was really late at night. It was about 11:30. They finished filming. There was only 4 of us. We were standing in the front driveway. And the next thing you know, there's a bright light in the sky.
Oh, no.
I mean, it was like, what is this bright light? Excuse me, blue around it. And we were all like, holy moly. And a couple of them whipped out their phones. I actually didn't have my phone with me. And we were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I mean, it didn't quite look like an alien, but it looked like a rocket. So you don't know if you're being invaded.
You're like, there's 2 ways this could go, and neither one seemed good.
Neither one seemed good. It turns out that Elon Musk was shooting off a rocket.
Oh, yeah. Elon Musk does that a lot.
So, but it is very disturbing. So you can imagine for these people who, there's satellites up there, it was during that time where they were just putting them up in the atmosphere, and you just don't know. And all of a sudden you're seeing this orb.
Yeah.
So Betty, who apparently was the extrovert out of them, saw this orb.
She's like, let's follow it.
She's like, oh my gosh. And they couldn't tell apparently whether the orb was following them or they were following the orb.
Yep. And then they did say, I think Barney was saying that it was an airplane. He kept telling it's an airplane until it started shifting how it was flying.
It started, doing the vertical instead of horizontal.
And then it would fly over landmarks, and that's how they started seeing how big it was. And they were saying it was like 40 feet and then 60 feet based off the landmarks that it was flying over on the road.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, if you're seeing something that big,
exactly,
moving like this instead of straight. You're probably not looking at an airplane.
No, you're not. You're not. And then, they apparently stopped, and somehow he was able to see inside the craft, which I think is kind of interesting, because he apparently saw 10 of them in there through these little windows, and
all I think of is those blimps. Remember,
exactly.
And then you have that little tiny station.
Exactly.
And then all these people are looking out, and I'm like, what else is like? I'm like, you got this big round thing.
Exactly.
And you got a little bay. I'm like, I don't know. My vision of this is not quite.
And so apparently he did have binoculars though. So apparently as soon as he saw the little people looking back at him that were humanoid but not quite human, he freaked out, ran back to the car, jumped in the car, and then they started to get sleepy.
Yep.
Which you get sleepy. And then they said about 35 minutes later, they were kind of
back home.
They could not figure out what happened to that 35 minutes, which kind of happens when you're on the road, right? Yep. Especially late at night.
After you see aliens, I imagine you're not sleeping. Like there's another reason.
Exactly.
Because I'm like, you would be like, I'm never sleeping again.
Exactly.
Like, never
I don't even want. Yeah. Exactly. So they get home, and they noticed, this is what I thought was really fascinating. She apparently had kind of a new dress on, and she noticed that there were little rips and tears in her dress.
Yeah.
And then he had like perfect shoes, and his shoes were scuffed up.
Yeah.
And they had sort of these kind of weird reactions.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was like thinking
something happened,
right?
And then there was powder on her dress, right?
I think so.
Yeah, there was some kind of
substance that she couldn't quite
understand,
figure out what it was.
So she took it outside and then blew it away. So there's little things in the story where I'm like, okay.
Yeah, you just kind of go, And then she put it away for 3 years.
So she threw it away first.
Oh,
and then she thought about, and then she was like, no, I probably shouldn't throw this away. And then she went out, got it from the trash can, and then put it away for 3 years.
Yeah, put it away for 3 years.
I was like,
and then she started having dreams.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder with the subconscious, right?
I imagine you're digging something deep, especially if you've been told that there's no one other than us in our universe.
Exactly.
And then you have to face that. And I mean, I imagine that trauma would definitely just
you want to just like push it right down.
Yep.
You know, and so she started to have the dreams, but they still couldn't remember anything. And then apparently they went to their church.
Oh yeah.
And this was the thing that actually, out of the whole story, alien abduction, all of this, the church was the one who leaked it to the press.
I did not know that.
Apparently they went to their church group that they went to, and they were like, this thing happened and it was really weird, and was just strange, and someone was secretly recording the meeting.
How did they secretly record meetings back in the 60s? Like,
I don't know.
Like, it's not like they can pull out a phone and be like, shh. No, like they got a big old
tape
phone.
recorder. I mean, it's like, I don't even know if it was like the rectangle tape recorders, but it was, they were secretly recording it.
They planned that out well then.
I was like, are they secretly recording everybody? What's going on?
Because how would they know otherwise?
I don't know. Those Unitarians, they were Unitarians. Anyway, and I say that in jest for any of our Unitarian people out there. And so they wanted to keep it secret, but they also were thinking, as time went on, they were, feeling not so great. Like something was off. Like you feel like something was off. And then somehow, I have to now look at my notes again. It was interesting because, they really did want to keep it secret, but then they ended up, apparently someone convinced them, and I didn't put that in my notes, I'm sorry, to report it to the Air Force.
Yeah, because I think, didn't they have an interview at the church, and an Air Force pilot came into the church?
Oh, okay, so there was the connection.
Yeah, so I think that's how they got into it. And then they all of a sudden brought in hypnosis.
Yeah, because someone from the National Institute, let me see if I can get this right, the NICAP, which I did not write down what that means, but the National whatever. Let me just see. Anyway, so they brought this guy in who was an astronomer, and he met with them, and he actually interviewed them in their home for 6 hours.
So that would be a long time of repeating the same conversation.
And he was impressed because usually when people lie, their stories start to fray.
Yep.
And there was no fraying, right? They were repeating the same thing for 6 hours in their home. And then they went to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist was the one who was like, maybe we should introduce hypnosis, but we're not sure because hypnosis could make trauma worse, apparently.
Which is what makes sense because you're opening those floodgates have been closed.
Exactly. So they ended up doing the hypnosis, and what was interesting with the psychiatrist, though, is he was never quite convinced that it was actually an alien abduction. He thought that maybe what happened is her dreams were so vivid and that her husband was kind of an introverted, quiet, impressionable man, that she ended up impressing on him what was in the dreams.
Interesting.
Right? And then it all came out in their hypnosis sessions, except this was the catch. There were things that Barney remembered that Betty did not, because they were in separate parts of the ship.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which would make sense. If you had two separate incidents happening, your memory would be completely different. But
because
otherwise they mirrored the 100%.
Exactly, because they took them to two separate parts of the ship.
So what happened when did the hypnosis go into what happened to them?
Yeah, apparently it went into very much in detail. In fact, they said that they were taken into the ship together. Apparently she remembered more than he did, but they put that down to her excitable type of personality. And she yelled to, apparently she was in front of, when they left the car, because what happened was, in actual fact, when he first saw them with the binoculars, he ran back to the car, got back in, and that's when they got sleepy. And then apparently what happened is they turned off onto a side road, and he said it was like a compulsion. And then they stopped, and there were these 10 aliens standing in the middle of the road, and then they felt like they should get out of the car. She was a little bit in front of him, he was a little bit behind, and she turned around and said something, Barney. And I guess the head alien goes, "Is that his name, Barney?" And she was like, "It's none of your business."
Automatically, every time I hear Barney, I think Barney the dinosaur. And the scene song pops in. So I'm like, at this point, I'm like, wait, this is the wrong time for that.
But then apparently they took them in the ship. And one of the details they took them in, and there was like, the windows are around the ship, and there was a hallway kind of around the ship, and there were rooms going off the hallway into the interior.
So like their office?
Like their office was so weird. And so they took them to separate rooms. That's when their memories diverged, right? That's when they had different memories.
Which would make sense.
Yeah.
You can't embed your memory. If they're saying that the wife had such an active imagination, and to be in hypnosis, and just randomly talking out, it couldn't match up.
No.
Not unless they didn't go into hypnosis and they totally planned it, which, but they never made money.
They ended up, helping people write a book, because once the story got out and there was a reporter.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The recordings got leaked to from the church. And so he tried to get them to talk to him, and they wouldn't talk to him, and the Air Force wouldn't talk to him. But then he ended up getting someone, I think, from a university or something to talk to him. And then that's what the story that he ran with.
Okay.
And then it was like there were so many errors in the story.
They came
out and they were like, we have to tell our own story.
And then they got a book deal.
Then they ended up writing a book.
And then they got a movie deal.
Then they got a movie. Yeah, and then it kind of went on and on, but it was like the first sort of mass media story about alien abduction. And there are other stories as well where there's like mass abductions that you hear about.
Yeah.
But this was the one that really, I think, caught the imagination of the whole country, right?
And just like last time we talked about The Exorcist, and then that led from a newspaper article to a book.
Yeah.
And this kind of mirrors that same thing. It went from an article being written or a videotape being recorded and sent in, and then all of a sudden now we have a whole, we have the Hill Abduction, and that's franchised a whole bunch of different stories from that, which is interesting to think of. Someone's personal experience just made a whole bunch of money.
It's a whole bunch of money in media for people. And for many years, I mean, it's like the Roswell books, and then the Roswell, the YA series, and then they ended up remaking that. I think they remade it just recently.
Oh, the TV show?
The TV show on the CW, which it just sort of engendered this whole thing. And of course, Roswell is a totally different
animal.
Yeah, which we'll talk about as well, because that actually feeds into the whole government.
Oh, yeah.
Reports that are being issued and were declassified in 2021.
They threatened lives. They did everything.
Oh, yeah.
They kept that hush-hush.
Absolutely.
Which makes me curious why, because with the reports with the hills, they had the interviews happening, and then they had the Air Force involved. And they had all the book was documented from those interviews, part of it.
Yeah.
So why would the government let that, especially in the 60s, let it come out? Like, unless it's a control factor. Like, maybe they're like, okay, we'll give this little bit. Yeah. And then now look at us today, having we're doing interviews. Like, they've been giving little bit.
It's not just media interviews. This is in front of Congress. They take an oath. Yeah. And they get thrown in jail if they're not telling the truth.
Exactly. And these are like Navy airline or pilots flying alongside little little jelly beans, saying that thing
they're calling them jelly beans now.
Yeah. And they're turning down systems. They have technology that we don't have. Yeah. And now we have NASA coming out with, I think it's a 33-page report of, I think it's hold on.
I mean, they're not necessarily calling them UFOs anymore either. They're calling them unidentified phenomena.
Unidentified.
Aerial phenomena. Yep. That's it.
And so UAP. Yeah. And they have a director for NASA.
Because there's another department.
There's a whole other department.
And this department the website went live on August 30th of this year. So they want you and us to report anything that we see in the sky.
And then NASA is creating an app that we can download on our phones to document UAPs.
Which include UFOs, but mostly they're UAPs.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you think of UFOs, unidentified flying objects, now they're talking about stuff in the ocean, going into the ocean. You have all of this, like, you're sitting there going, this is a lot. It's a lot. But after COVID, I'm like, we can do anything.
What's interesting is after COVID, it's like nobody cares.
No, because at this point you can throw anything. We've been through a pandemic.
Exactly.
And we survived. Exactly. So what else is there? No,
when this came out, it was 2021, and I remember hardly anybody was paying attention. I mean, it was like, am I reading this correctly? And then it was like, wait a minute, I am, because these are declassified now, and now they're doing congressional interviews.
It's crazy.
People are trying to figure out whether these people are, being deceptive or not, or if they're actually UFOs or just unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yeah, you're like, how can a phenomenon turn off someone's tracking system?
Exactly. That's really
weird. Bizarre. Yeah. And that's them not telling us quite everything.
Everything. Yeah. And the fact that they now have this whole situation where you can report it, download it on your phone,
which makes sense it makes so much sense for them to do that, because there's now millions and millions of people taking photos, and they can just be like, okay, we know what that is. We're tracking this one. I mean, it's really like the Men in Black kind of situation.
It is.
Of like, all right, our alien's here. This guy's here.
Exactly. Whose memory's being erased. What's
they're
going
tracking
on?
Everything.
And are they even, do they even look like the little people that the Hills saw?
Well, in the Hills, I think it wasn't even, they didn't look very different than us, other than they were shorter, right? And then their eyes were bigger.
They had the big eyes and the funky heads. And so that's where we get that weird triangle head thing.
I did read somewhere, and this is someone debunking the Hills story, is they said that at the same time, I think it was, what is that show called? The Outer Limits.
Oh yeah,
had an episode
that's right.
of an alien with big eyes, the same way that Barney Hill had described in his
witness statement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they're saying subconsciously he took that from that show and put it into his dream cycle. But then I think Betty said, no, we don't watch that show. And so, but it's just bizarre that that was the same time.
And that is sort of the vagaries of the human mind too, because many of us, whether it's aliens or paranormal or ghosty ghosts or whatever, we don't want to admit what we might actually be seeing.
Yes.
So we try to wrap it in something familiar, and I mean that's kind of a known thing that the human mind does to protect itself, because when you're faced with something that's outside of any realm of possibility in your little life,
we don't want to face it.
We don't want to face it,
no.
Right? So you're going to wrap it in something and pull somewhere from your mind, oh, well, this looks familiar, right? So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's bizarre. At the same time...
And The Outer Limits was a huge show.
It was huge. Yeah. And at the same time, in the 1960s, we weren't desensitized like we are nowadays. So I imagine that made a huge impression, especially if they had watched that it would have stuck subconsciously.
Absolutely. But you did have H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds.
Oh yeah.
That came out. That was just a radio program, and people thought we were being.
That came out in the 40s or?
I think it was the 50s. Let me look it up really quickly. H.G. Wells.
And then Roswell happened in the 40s, right?
That was, I think, the 50s as well.
So we had a lot of UFO incidents happening, either fictionalized or non-fictionalized, depending.
Let me see. It's actually Orson Welles actually did the.
And that was brilliant. Like, if you think of a brilliant way to captivate an audience.
Yeah, actually, that was 1938. I didn't realize that. I mean, and people literally thought it was Halloween.
Yeah,
right?
They thought it was ending.
They thought, or it was anyway, the night before Halloween. People thought it was actually happening.
Which would be petrifying.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that created such an uproar, and I imagined, because people would have been like, what am I going to do? And then they turn the radio off, and then they're packing up thinking they're being invaded. You know how many pissed off people there would be after that? Like, wait a minute, that was a joke? Excuse me? And they don't even listen to the whole program?
No, exactly.
So smart.
But what was interesting is not that much later, in 1846, was the invasion of Los Angeles, where people thought they were being invaded by aliens. And there was a huge military response.
That was
that was in, well, it wasn't 18, it was 1942,
okay.
Sorry. I was misreading that. But 1942, and there are still people who are little children who are telling their stories, and they remember and they believe that they were aliens. Now, some have debunked this, that it wasn't, that it was because it was following Pearl Harbor.
Interesting.
So they've sort of said that. What did they end up saying? I think it was a false alarm is what it was. But
they want us to believe that.
Yeah, and they were saying that they were actually searchlights, and people were thinking that they were aliens. And initially they thought they were being attacked, but then they were like looking and they were like, oh my gosh, it's an alien invasion.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of a fascinating thing.
Which, if you think about it, okay, so if we do a timeline from the 1940s, 1960s, the way people were reacting back then to nowadays, where it's coming out into the Congress and no one's watching it. No one's paying attention. We're getting tidbits off here and there. We just don't have time to care.
No. And Roswell was 1947
and
too.
so you're looking at it going, what they so if UFOs are real, or APs, and so, and social media has been feeding us this. Our media has been gradually feeding us, and they took us from a complete social distress to now we don't care, bring it on. I mean, whoever the PR person was has done a really good job planning this out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're kind of into conspiracy theories, but even if you're not,
it's still interesting.
Everybody they're exhausted.
Yes.
Still, right? It's not that long ago. It's since 2020. And they're like, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? Like you said, it's kind of like, bring it on. Let's see what the aliens look like.
Let's see. We might have best friends elsewhere. But it's also, but the universe is so much bigger than what it was back then.
Yes.
So now we're looking at a universe where it's infinite. So there has to be, I'd imagine, something out there. The scarier part to me is who are they and how much smarter are they than us?
Yeah.
At this point. And then also, where do we line up on
the
food chain? Like, seriously.
And there's been some amazing short stories written.
I can imagine.
And books. Orson Scott Card comes to mind. He wrote like the Xenophobia series. And he did some brilliant short story work about humans in the food chain of the extraterrestrial sort of.
That would be petrifying. That scares me more than anything. Is if we have a creatures out there that are coming over here, and it's been like decades of them being like, let's not introduce ourselves yet.
Yeah.
Until they're ready. Why? That scares me.
Maybe
more
we're
than
like
anything.
the ghetto part of the universe.
They're like, stay away.
We're just gonna go on vacation and take a look at the zoo. I don't know. Which could be.
Yeah, they came on over Cobra and they're like, oh man.
They're like, they're so cute. They went to the moon.
Yeah. But it is
fascinating.
It is fascinating. And if you look at it standpoint from us, and so our evolution in technology has been so quick. So
especially since Roswell.
Yeah. And then also, if we went from creating fire to creating the wheel to creating automobiles to going to space within, we went from like automobile to space within 50 years?
Yeah.
So if you are watching, if you're watching people evolve, and you are an outside civilization, and we are heavily violent civilization, at some point you have to be like, okay, either we have to get involved or not, because either they're going to kill themselves or they're going to come after us. Eventually, because our involvement over time to now, we're looking at going to Mars. We're shooting satellites out. That would be a major cause of like, okay, now we have to get involved. Now we have to watch again, which is scary.
Yeah.
That's scary.
And technology is far more advanced than they let us plebes know.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, let's face it. The internet was developed in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Late 70s, I think it was.
And now look at us. We have technology. We have every information we want.
Yeah.
At the tip of our fingers. And now we have AI that's looking to take over almost everybody's jobs.
Everybody's jobs. Right now we're just at generative, but when we get to predictive AI, which is still pretty sketchy, they haven't perfected that one yet, but when it gets to predictive AI, then we start getting into what's human, what's not human.
Which might be scarier than what's out there.
Yeah, and they're already starting to do in fact, I just saw today, they were recruiting for people to volunteer for the neural implants.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, not me. Not me. I'm like, no one's putting anything up.
Exactly. No.
No, they
But yeah, so there's that,
I don't know who produced it, but there was a web series, a YouTube web series about that, about these implants that they put in, and then people were able to see their social media feeds and see video, and what happened was it started killing people. They overload, and people would just drop down dead. And they didn't understand why and who was triggering it. It's fascinating.
Wow.
But it was like the extent.
And you have to remember that even if people do neural, implants, you're still dealing with a biological body that has not evolved in any way, shape, or form. Whether you believe in evolution or creation or whatever you believe in, the Big Bang Theory, humanity, our actual bodies have not really evolved much.
No, not at all. And then you're putting a foreign object in your body, and then expecting the body to accept it and be like, here you go. In our mind, they say we only access 3% of our
capabilities.
So now we're adding technology into a mind that's already like hiding back that much.
Exactly.
And then you're saying, hey, you know what? Let's speed you up.
Exactly.
I mean, there's going to be some major side effects.
Yeah.
And and it's not natural. It's not like we are training ourselves or developing ourselves mentally.
No, there's no like, there's technological development, but there's no, it seems like that the how do I say, the stipulations that used to be, should we do this, those are all gone.
Yes,
It's more like, can we do this?
And when are we doing this?
And when are we doing this? So, if I was an alien species, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to be coming around here.
That or gain control quicker than not.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
look, like, again, we could look at the internet. We have access to every little information we want.
Yes.
We can drive in the car and be like, hey, Siri, can you answer this question for me? And if you're programming that into our head, and now what's the next step? Like, are we looking at superhumans? And then if you do have an alien civilization that has already progressed through technology.
Yes.
And then they're saying we have to either gain control or we have to team up with these people.
One or the other.
Yeah, because it all comes down to that food chain. And then it depends on where you're landing. I mean, I imagine it's all strategic. It has to be.
Yeah, I would imagine. But what is fascinating is how the governments are responding.
Exactly.
And it's not just the U.S. government.
No.
It's like other European countries.
Well, look at Mexico.
Yeah, with their little aliens introduced to Congress. You know?
And you look at these aliens, and all I think of is someone took some plaster and poured it in, put some sand, put it in a box, and they're like, look at what I created.
Exactly.
But now they're doing X-rays.
Yeah, they're
like
actually
they're going
studying
through
them.
the thing, and you're looking at it going, why are we doing that? And then it's in so with that, it was a journalist who has these, and he brought them from Peru.
It's always
so
a
now the
journalist.
Peru government's saying, why did you take these out of Peru? They're ours.
And supposedly they're 1,000 years old.
Yeah, and these people are like moving them around. I'm like, if we did that with our bones, it'd just crumble down.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Someone plastered this.
Yeah.
And then I guess I read one other report or saw something where they're saying that the reports that they're showing isn't based off the bodies that they're giving out to the government. It's based off a third body.
Okay.
And the scientists are looking at it going, no. All of this DNA tracking it's part of this world. They didn't say what, but it's the DNA is some kind of creature that we are known to. And they're like, nothing's abnormal.
No, and I had read something that said, and that's the thing, it's just like all up for grabs, is that they were looking and they were like, well, there might be glue holding their bones together. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and you're like, now it's like, and the government's going through with it. But at the same time, which makes you think, what else do they have that they're like, this is legit, and we have to do all of this steps to make sure what we're looking at is real. Yeah,
and it may be just again desensitizing people.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I don't know. It's a spooky world.
It's a spooky world.
It's so spooky.
So we're gonna actually, because we love reaction videos, we're gonna actually wrap this up, and we're gonna do a couple of reaction videos to UFO alien sightings that we haven't seen before.
Nope.
So make sure you tune in for that, and also comment, like, subscribe. We'd love to see your comments.
Yes, we do.
And we will see you again in the next one.
Yay!